Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are taking a bit of a shortcut, you could say, right into how things are connected.
That's right. We're diving deep into something most people have heard of, but maybe don't know the science behind it.
6 degrees of separation, that phrase gets thrown around a lot.
It does. But we're going beyond just the catchphrase. We're looking at the actual scientific puzzle, the small world problem.
Okay, so our mission today.
It's really about tackling this huge paradox. I mean, almost 8 billion people on the planet. So much separates us, geography, language, you name it.
And yet, the idea is you can reach anyone in just 6 steps. How?
Exactly. We're going to dig into the sort of fundamental rules of networks that explain this. And it affects everything, really.
Right.
Disease spread, how your brain works. It's everywhere.
Right, and I think a great place to start is with that one story, the one that really made people sit up and notice this wasn't just, a game.
Oh, yeah, the German newspaper experiment. Before that, 6 degrees was mostly like a fun theory, maybe a footnote from an old story.
But this is 1999. They decided to properly test it. And they picked, well, about as opposite ends of the spectrum as you could get.
It was a brilliant setup, really. They took this totally anonymous guy.
A falafel vendor in a small German town.
Right. Just an ordinary person.
Yeah.
And the target.
Marlon Brando. Hollywood legend. Famously private, hard to reach.
Exactly. So you've got culture, profession, fame, geography, massive gaps to bridge.
That outcome, though, finding a connection in exactly 6 steps, it almost sounds a bit too perfect, doesn't it? Like, were people skeptical? Did they think maybe the path was, I don't know, cherry-picked?
Oh, absolutely. That was the first reaction for many. Confirmation bias. Maybe they just found a path that worked.
But the actual chain of connections wasn't obvious at all, was it?
Not in the slightest. That's what made it compelling. It was messy, organic. The falafel guy knew a local politician.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe plausible.
Uh-huh.
But then that politician knew someone at a music production company in Berlin.
Okay, getting a bit more stretched.
Right. And that person had worked with the director over in Paris. And that director, years before, had been on a set with a cinematographer.
Wow.
Who, much more recently, worked on a movie involving one of Brando's agents back in L.A.
That's quite a journey.
Yeah.
A real chain of friend of a friend of a friend.
Exactly. And when you count those links, those handshakes...
6 steps.
6 steps. From the vendor to Brando. It wasn't just theory anymore. Stanley Milgram's earlier work suggesting this number 6 suddenly looked, well, pretty solid, even across that huge social distance.
Okay, so that brings us right back to that core puzzle. How is that even possible in such a massive world?
Well, the first thing we have to tackle is the math. Because actually, from a purely mathematical standpoint, 6 degrees isn't just possible, it's almost expected, maybe even conservative.
Really? Okay, let's unpack that. We need to think about, exponential growth.
Exactly. Let's just make a basic assumption. Say every person knows about 100 other people, not close friends, just, acquaintances, people in their wider circle.
Okay, 100 people. Seems reasonable.
So step 1, you reach 100 people directly.
Got it.
Step 2, each of those 100 people knows 100 different people. So that's 100 times 100.
10,000 potential connections.
Right. Step 3, each of those 10,000 knows 100 more. That's 1,000,000.
Okay, it's scaling fast.
Very fast. Step 4 gets you to 100 million.
And step 5, 100 million times 100. That's 10 billion.
10 billion potential connections at step 5, which is...
more than everyone?
Exactly. So based on just that simple math, assuming your connections spread out randomly and don't overlap too much, you should, in theory, be able to reach anyone in 5 steps, maybe even fewer.
So the math says 5 steps, max. But the famous idea is 6, and you called it a problem. If the math is so simple, why the big scientific fuss? Why did it take decades to figure out?
Because that simple math relies on one huge assumption that's just wrong. That our connections are random, that your 100 acquaintances are just picked randomly from the global population, like drawing names out of a hat containing everyone on Earth.
But that's not how life works at all. We stick together.
Precisely. We are incredibly clustered. Think about it. We live near certain people. We work with certain people. We share hobbies, languages, backgrounds. We form these dense local groups.
Right. My friends tend to know my other friends. We exist in bubbles.
Exactly. And that clustering should make long-distance connections really hard. If everyone you know lives on your street or works in your office,
then reaching someone on the other side of the world should take ages. You'd have to go street by street, town by town.
that's the intuition. In network theory terms, if you model that clustering perfectly, what they call a lattice graph, where everyone's just connected to their immediate neighbors, the path length to get across the network should be enormous.
Maybe 50 steps? 100.
Easily, because every step is just local. So high clustering should mean high separation, long path lengths.
Okay, so here's the conflict. We know we live in these tight clusters,
High local clustering.
but we also see these surprisingly short connections across the globe, like the Brando example. 6 steps.
Short global path lengths.
That's the contradiction. High clustering A&D short paths. That's the small world paradox.
That's it, exactly. We seem to have the properties of both a highly ordered clustered network and a random short path network at the same time. And for decades, scientists couldn't really build a model that captured both.
The existing models were either too random, missing the clusters, or too ordered, missing the short connections.
Right. They couldn't reconcile those two fundamental features of, well, reality. They needed a new way to think about network structure.
So this is where the breakthrough happens. We needed a model that could explain how you keep that cozy local feel but still get that global reach.
And that brings us to the late 90s and the work of Duncan Watts and Steve Strogatz. They weren't necessarily trying to prove the 6 degrees thing. They were mathematicians trying to build a network model that actually behaved like the real world seemed to, something that resolved the paradox.
Okay, so how did they approach it? What was their model?
Well, they started with the perfect model for clustering that lattice graph, where everyone's just connected locally. Nice and ordered, high clustering.
Right, the model that shouldn't have short paths.
Exactly. Then they did something quite subtle. They didn't just randomize everything. They started introducing randomness just a tiny bit at a time.
How?
They took a few of those existing local connections and essentially rewired them. They'd pick a connection, disconnect one end, and reconnect it to some other random node somewhere else in the network, creating a long-distance link, a shortcut.
Ah, so most connections stay local, but you sprinkle in just a few random leaps across the network.
Precisely. And they systematically tested what happened to both clustering and the average path length as they increased the percentage of these rewired shortcuts.
And this is where the magic happens, right?
Right.
What did they find?
It was stunning, really. They found that the clustering stayed pretty high even with some rewiring. The local structure was quite resilient.
Okay, so it still felt clustered.
Yes. But the average path length across the entire network, it plummeted, introducing just a tiny number of these long-range shortcuts drastically, disproportionately reduced the degrees of separation for the whole system.
Those shortcuts basically punched holes through the cluster structure, making everything feel close.
Think of it like having a really efficient local subway system. Lots of stops close together. But then you add just 1 or 2 express lines that shoot across the entire city.
Right, suddenly getting from one end to the other is super fast, even though most of the track is still local.
That's a great analogy. And the truly amazing part was how few of these shortcuts were needed. This is where we get that mind-blowing number.
The number that explains the 6 degrees.
Yes. For a huge network like the entire human population, Watts and Strogatz calculated that if only, get this, 0.03% of all connections are these long-distance shortcuts.
0.03%. That's tiny.
It's almost nothing. If just that minuscule fraction of friendships or acquaintanceships are the kind that bridge different clusters, different cities, different professions, different social circles, then the average path length for the whole planet drops down to 6.
Wow. Okay, wait. 0.03%. That means 99.97% of our links can be completely local, clustered, redundant, people just like us. But that tiny fraction, those few unusual ties, they're doing all the heavy lifting for global connection. That's incredible leverage.
It really is. It tells us the world feels small, not because we're all neighbors, but because a very small number of connections act as incredibly powerful bridges. You don't need many, you just need some.
And the beauty of this mathematical finding is that it connected perfectly with something sociologists have been talking about for decades.
Absolutely. This wasn't just abstract math. It lined up beautifully with Mark Granovetter's work from the 1970s, his famous concept.
The strength of weak ties.
Exactly. Granovetter noticed something really interesting when he studied how people found jobs.
It wasn't their best friends who helped them land the job.
Rarely. It was usually acquaintances, people they didn't know that well, their weak ties, not their strong ties, close friends and family.
That seems counterintuitive. Why would near strangers be more helpful than your closest friends?
Well, think about your close friends, your strong ties. You probably share a lot in common, right? Same social circles, maybe similar jobs or interests.
Yeah, that's true. It's called homophily, right?
Yeah.
Birds of a feather flock together.
Precisely. So your close friends, they mostly know the same things, hear the same gossip, see the same job postings. They offer great support, but in terms of new information or opportunities, there's a lot of redundancy.
They're stuck in the same information bubble, like that local subway line, again, useful for getting around the neighborhood, but it doesn't go anywhere new.
That's it exactly. Now think about that weak tie. Maybe an old college roommate you email once a year, or someone you knew from a previous job who moved away.
Right. Someone outside your usual day-to-day.
They're connected to a whole different network. Different information, different opportunities. They might not be your go-to for emotional support, but they are your potential bridge to something completely new. They're the international flight.
Okay, so those weak ties, those acquaintances, they're the real-world version of the 0.03% shortcuts in the Strogatz model.
That's the connection. They are the crucial, low-frequency but high-impact links that connect your dense little cluster to the wider world.
And the math showed you only need a tiny number of those weak tie bridges to dramatically shrink the distance to basically anyone else.
It's about the structure, not the quantity.
Yeah.
A few well-placed weak ties are structurally essential.
Now, this whole small world idea, it's not just about how people find jobs or connect to Marlon Brando. You mentioned earlier, it's kind of universal, like it shows up everywhere.
It really does, which is what makes it so fundamental. It's not just a sociology thing. Let's look at biology. The classic example is the nematode worm, C. elegans.
Ah, yes, the lab workhorse. Why is it important here?
Because scientists have mapped its entire nervous system. Every single neuron and connection. It has exactly 282 neurons.
Okay, a tiny brain compared to ours, but fully mapped. And when they looked at how those 282 neurons are wired together.
Bingo. They found a classic small world network structure.
No way.
Yep. You have clusters of neurons that work closely together on specific functions, high local clustering. But you also have connections that leap across these clusters, linking different functional groups.
So shortcuts in the worm brain.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
And because of that structure, the average path length, the number of steps to get a signal from any one neuron to any other neuron, is incredibly short.
How short?
Just 2.65 steps on average.
Wow. So the same principle that gets a message across the globe in 6 human steps gets a signal across a worm's brain in under 3 neural steps. What does that tell us?
It strongly suggests that this small world architecture clusters plus shortcuts is evolution's way of optimizing information processing. You need local specialization, clusters, and rapid global integration shortcuts to function efficiently. Our own much more complex brains likely operate on the same fundamental principle.
Okay, that's biology. What about, say, culture? The Hollywood example often comes up.
Right. The Kevin Bacon number game is basically a playful version of this. And studies have shown the average separation between Hollywood actors linked by appearing in the same film is actually less than 6, often under 4.
Why is it even smaller in Hollywood?
Probably because it's a highly centralized network. You have thousands of actors, yes, but they all tend to connect through a smaller number of hubs, major studios, powerful agents, A-list directors. These hubs act like massive shortcuts, pulling the whole network even closer together.
Makes sense. And it's not just living systems or social ones, right? You mentioned infrastructure earlier.
Yes, engineered systems often involve or are designed with small world properties too. Think about the power grid.
Okay. How does that work?
Well, you have lots of local connections lines serving a specific neighborhood or town. That's your clustering, providing local reliability. But you also need those huge, high-voltage transmission lines that cross states or even countries. Those are the shortcuts.
And why are those long-distance lines, those shortcuts, so critical?
Resilience, mainly. If one local area has a blackout, say, due to a storm, those long-distance lines allow the grid operators to reroute power from a completely different unaffected region. They bridge the clusters.
So the shortcuts prevent local failures from cascading and taking down the whole system.
Ideally, yes. Though, as we'll see, those same shortcuts can also help problems spread faster if things go wrong. But the point is, the structure balances local needs with overall system stability. Same goes for things like global airline networks or supply chains.
So looking at worms, Hollywood, power grids, it really drives home that this isn't just a fluke of how humans socialize. It seems to be a fundamental mathematical principle for organizing complex systems efficiently.
Exactly. It's the optimal way to balance local cohesion and global reach.
Okay, so we've established the what and the how. It exists, it's explained by these shortcuts, it's everywhere. Now, for the big so what What are the real-world consequences of living in a world wired this way, held together by that tiny 0.03%?
Well, the implications are huge, and they cut both ways. Let's start with the dangerous side. Disease.
Ah, those shortcuts sound like bad news for pandemics.
They are precisely the mechanism that makes pandemics spread so terrifyingly fast. Imagine a disease starting in a highly clustered traditional network without many long-distance shortcuts.
Okay, like maybe in a more isolated historical community.
Right. The disease would spread, but more slowly, moving from neighbor to neighbor, cluster to cluster. Maybe it takes, say, 73 days in a model to infect the whole network. That gives authorities some time to react, to contain it locally.
But now introduce the shortcuts, the international flights, the global trade routes, the 0.03%.
Suddenly, the game changes completely. That same disease, with the same infectiousness within a cluster, can leap across the globe instantly via those shortcuts. The models show it could spread through the entire network in maybe just 26 days.
Wow, 73 days down to 26? That's nearly 3 times faster. A massive reduction in response time.
It's dramatic. Those shortcuts become super spreader pathways on a global scale. Think about historical plagues versus modern ones. The Black Death spread incredibly fast for its time, but it was still largely constrained by the speed of ships and caravans.
Right, the shortcuts were much slower back then.
Exactly. Today's infrastructure, our modern 0.03%, means pathogens can circle the globe before we even realize there's a major outbreak. Our connectivity is, in this sense, a structural vulnerability.
And this isn't just about literal viruses, is it? The same pathways work for, well, anything that spreads through a network.
Absolutely anything. Information, ideas, memes, financial news, even emotions like panic or confidence.
So the good side.
The good side is that beneficial things spread just as fast. A brilliant scientific discovery, a life-saving medical technique, a useful piece of software. It can disseminate globally incredibly quickly because of those weak ties and shortcuts connecting different research groups or industries.
Faster innovation, faster adoption of good ideas.
Yes. Opportunities can spread rapidly, too. That job opening Granovetter studied, it reaches people outside the immediate circle much faster in a small world network.
But the downside is just as powerful.
Equally powerful. Misinformation, conspiracy theories, toxic ideologies, they use the exact same network pathways. They spread just as efficiently as truth.
And financial panic, like a bank run or a market crash.
Classic small world phenomenon. Fear can jump between interconnected financial institutions or groups of investors via those crucial links far faster than reassuring. Rational information can propagate through the denser, slower local clusters. The shortcuts amplify the panic.
So the efficiency cuts both ways. Faster good stuff, faster bad stuff.
It's the definition of a double-edged sword. Our interconnectedness fuels innovation and opportunity, but it also makes us vulnerable to rapid contagion, whether it's a virus or a dangerous idea. High efficiency often comes at the cost of low resilience to certain kinds of shocks.
This whole framework, understanding the power of these shortcuts,
Yeah.
it feels like it must have completely shaken up academia when Watts and Strogatz published their work.
Oh, profoundly. We need to talk about the legacy of that 1998 paper in the journal Nature. It's called Collective Dynamics of Small World Networks.
It wasn't just another math paper then.
Not at all. It essentially launched a whole new way of thinking about complex systems. Before them, you had mathematicians doing abstract graph theory over here, and sociologists or biologists studying real-world networks over there, often without much connection.
And this paper bridged that gap.
Massively. It provided a relatively simple, elegant model that captured a fundamental property of reality, and it gave researchers across dozens of fields a common language and a tool to analyze connectivity in their own systems.
When we talk about impact in science, one key measure is citations, right? How many other studies build upon that original work?
That's the gold standard, really. And the citation count for that single 1998 Watson-Strogatz paper is, well, it's almost unbelievable.
How many?
It's been cited over 58,000 times.
58,000.
Yeah.
That's astronomical for a single paper.
It truly is. To give you some perspective, that's more citations than Watson and Crick's famous 1953 paper describing the structure of DNA.
Wait, really? More cited than the discovery of the double helix?
Slightly more, yes. Which is just staggering. It tells you something about how broadly applicable and foundational this small world concept became.
Why do you think it had that level of impact? More than DNA structure.
I think it's because DNA structure, while obviously world-changing, is primarily about biology. The small world network concept, as soon as Watts and Strogatz described it, people realized it applied almost everywhere.
Right. We talked about neuroscience.
And sociology, the weak ties.
Power grids.
But then computer scientists immediately grabbed it for understanding the internet structure, for designing better routing algorithms. Data needs to find shortcuts, too.
Okay, that makes sense.
Linguists used it to analyze how words connect in language, finding core hub words and rarer bridge words. Epidemiologists, obviously, adopted it immediately. Economists used it to model financial markets and trade networks. Even climate scientists use it to look at how weather patterns might sync up across vast distances.
So it just exploded across disciplines because it offered a fundamental insight into connectivity itself, regardless of what was being connected.
Exactly. It provided a unifying framework. And there's a wonderful irony in all this, isn't there?
Which is?
The paper describing how ideas can spread rapidly through networks via shortcuts itself spread rapidly through the academic network via intellectual shortcuts, connecting fields that didn't talk much before.
Huh. The idea about virality went viral. That's perfect.
It's a beautiful piece of meta-science. The discovery perfectly mirrored its own subject matter.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. Bring it all together for everyone listening. What's the core takeaway?
The core takeaway is this. The world feels small and functions as if it's small, not because it is small in population or distance, but because of its network structure.
It's not about the number of nodes, but the wiring between them.
Precisely. And the key to that wiring is the existence of a surprisingly small number of those long-range connections, those shortcuts, maybe only 0.03% linking otherwise dense local clusters together.
And those shortcuts are often our weak ties. The acquaintances, the people outside our immediate bubble.
They are. And these structural shortcuts are the conduits for almost everything that defines modern globalized life, from pandemics and financial crises to job opportunities and the spread of innovation.
So understanding this isn't just academic. It explains, well, a lot about how the world works, for better and for worse.
It's a fundamental law of connectivity. It shapes biology, society, technology. It dictates the speed and reach of almost everything that flows through these complex systems we're all part of. It means global events aren't random. They're often the predictable outcome of this specific network structure.
Which leaves us with, I think, a really practical and maybe unsettling final thought for you, the listener, to consider. If we now know that this tiny fraction, this 0.03% of connections, dictates so much how fast viruses spread, how fast ideas travel, how opportunities reach us, how much conscious effort do you put into cultivating or even just recognizing those crucial weak ties in your own life? Are you aware of who your potential shortcuts are, the people who bridge your world to other worlds? And are you maybe strategically nurturing those connections, optimizing your personal 0.03% to access new information, new perspectives, and new possibilities? Something to think about.